Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started, folks. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Ryan Sisson, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Juliana Stonehouse. My role at Trent is as the coordinator of community-based research. There's Juliana. And Juliana is the student experience coordinator for Trent University. And Juliana and I both work within a department called Career Space, which is relatively new to Trent.
Thanks, Ryan. As Ryan mentioned, I'm the Student Experience Coordinator at Career Space, and our main goal at Career Space is to provide support to students to help them discover any career opportunities that they might want to pursue. We also provide resources such as resume writing, interview prep, and career counseling. In addition to this, it's also our mandate to help students, every student at Trent, have some sort of hands-on experiential learning opportunity as well. And this is what brings us here today. One of the many ways that students can have that hands-on experience is through research. And so this is what we'll explore today. It's very exciting. Just some housekeeping items. We'll keep all participants, we'll keep all attendees on mute for now. But we are excited and encourage you with any questions that you may have in regards to Adam's presentation or any questions you may have for myself or Ryan about Career Space. Please use your Q&A function that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Once Adam wraps up his presentation, I will then be facilitating the Q&A, and we find that in a lot of these types of scenarios, that's where a lot of really enriching conversation can happen. So again, we highly encourage you to use that function. We've also, as part of the webinar today, we've included a quick video about Career Space that we would love to share with you.
Career Space, our on-campus career center and experiential learning hub, is located on the top floor of the Student Center. All Trent students are guaranteed to have a career-related experiential learning opportunity before they graduate. Talk about an incredible way to gain the upper hand as you enter into the workforce. Through Career Space at Trent, students in all programs have the opportunity to tap in to nearly limitless combinations of academics, in-class learning, and practical career experiences, with access to interview training, resume assistance, and a list of companies ready to give you some real-life experience. Let Career Space show you the way to your own unique idea of success.
All right, thank you so much, Juliana, for that introduction. And thanks again to everyone who's joining us today in this virtual format. We're all sad that we couldn't join together for a celebration of research, but we're certainly thrilled to have Adam Call join us today and share his presentation with us. So Adam is a School of Business student. He has been working on this research project since the beginning of September. And like all students, Adam has a faculty supervisor and has been working quite closely for a host organization. In this case, Adam's faculty supervisor was Byron Liu, and his host organization was the Workforce Development Board. Adam's research title is The Economic Impact of International Students on Peterborough's Local Economy. And through that, Adam researched the economic impact of Trent University international students who are attending schools in the Peterborough area, as well as identifying support services that are available to those students. So without further ado, Adam, I'd love to turn the floor over to you. And just a friendly reminder, as Juliana mentioned, if you have any questions at all during Adam's research, please use that Q&A feature at the bottom of the page. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, is everything visible?
Looks good, Adam.
Okay, perfect. So as stated, I am Adam Call. I underwent the research project Economic Impact of International Students on Peterborough's Local Economy under the supervision of Dr. Byron Liu, with the help of the Workforce Development Board. I will just quickly go into my methodology to discuss the type of survey that I created. Began with 38 questions, both qualitative and quantitative, with approximately 120 active respondents with material contributions. 198 opened the survey, but only 120 approximately answered in meaningful ways, all of these being Trent University students as stated. The largest stakeholder groups that I identified were that of computer science students with a 13% proportion, business administration students with a 15% proportion, as well as Indian international students, which made up 28% of my survey.
Wow.
Background into the general environment. Between 2014 and 2017, the Canadian international student population increased by 51.6%, with over 50% of all international students traveling from either China or India. My literature review, I found that many students have been traveling. The shared attribute was for career opportunities outside of their country, looking to work abroad, defined as appropriate work related to their field. And most of the literature focuses on migration trends, trends indicating what actually happens based on certain attributes. Discussing the economic impact, I created a projection that I found that students contributed approximately $38,000 per year while studying abroad, just through expenditure itself, not including what the contribution through work or bringing others over. This was based on the graph to the right, where I measured the students' average expenditure based on their responses. I netted it based on what they reported themselves not spending much of in town, and then I added their tuition. Statistics Canada found that the average expenditure of a domestic resident was $34,206, indicating that international students, at the very least in the short run, have a larger economic impact per year. In terms of labor data, 45% of respondents reported working during the semester, increasing to 54% during the summer. Many of these respondents indicated they worked full-time or full-time equivalent, indicating now visa restriction prevents students from working more than 20 hours under most conditions during the semester. Very few students found that the work they were doing was relative to their career, either in the semester or the summer, at 18% and 26% respectively. 63% of respondents indicated that if work related to their career were provided, they would stay in Peterborough, contrasting the 4% response otherwise, which I will discuss more later. Sorry, a lot of messages. There are strong trends in the qualitative sections towards dissatisfaction to work opportunities. Now, I would emphasize this as a perception. There's low confidence in the local area for their work or career opportunities, and 96% of respondents indicated that their career was in the very least very important, if not extremely important, to their lifestyle. Just some trends I discuss based on later literature that I found was that students with work experience prior to university had a higher tendency to engage in entrepreneurial activity after graduation. There's also strong career self-management, which is as mentioned with CareerSpace, the ability to write a good resume, the ability to interview well. These are indicative of the transition between academics and employment once they graduate. And career opportunities and community belonging were by far the two strongest predictors of migration intents. That is, with these two things present, you are more likely to see students stay after graduation. Quickly just go over the foreign income and some implications. 17% of students indicated that they pay their own tuition themselves. That means without explicit support from family, a governing body, a trust, or a scholarship. 71 students indicated having some sort of grant, whether domestic, international, or both, and the average domestic and international grant were $7,000 and $6,250 respectively. To discuss some qualitative trends, I found that 79% of students that showed interest in staying abroad with Canada, contrasting the 4% discussed prior. We asked students what their reasons were for each. With regards to those that didn't want to stay in Peterborough, they cited a lack of opportunity and employment, as well as an unwelcoming community, citing reasons of racism and prejudice being shared across the board. Students also reported that Trent was highly impactful in their decision on whether to migrate locally at 57%. My next slide shows some contrasting information that I found interesting. This shows attitudes of international students by just all international students and larger stakeholders, including India, China, Nigeria, and the United Arab Emirates. And across the board, many students reported Trent being something that they felt strongly about, like they were in favor of, which might suggest some sort of strange relationship between feeling strong about your school but not wanting to stay nonetheless. Otherwise, we can see here the trends for the most part, though the bars might look high, are quite low considering what their options were up till 5. Students were very dissatisfied with jobs across the board. Chinese students were quite dissatisfied with recreational opportunities and religion. And so it just, in general, we can see that these students, while we refer to them as international students, are different students with different cultures and have different backgrounds, and obviously, as a result, have different attitudes towards each of these. Discussing a little more on the qualitative trends, many students chose Canada as a destination for relational reasons rather than purely occupational reasons. I took one of my questions from a US study that looked at reasons for traveling to the US for further education. The big attributes for students traveling to the US were for the quality of education and employment opportunities. Those that traveled to Canada were looking for quality of life improvements, a lower cost of living, opportunities for their friends, and opportunities for their family, while still holding a strong attribute in looking for career opportunities. I also asked what the reasons for staying in Canada were, and these answers resonated with these attributes as well, suggesting that they both came to Canada and want to stay for those reasons. I'll briefly go over my recommendations based on my findings. First, I believe increasing engagement with international students through various means will remedy most of the issues. As indicated, the strongest indicators are strong community involvements and employment opportunities. I believe that if we create community touchpoints to improve relationship with these students, we will increase their awareness of the social services available, such as that of CareerSpace, improving their career self-management by providing interview skills and resume writing. It will also allow them to network more effectively to bridge the gap that exists where you are in an unfamiliar area. Trent Valley International Coffee House is a great example of a program that does exactly this. It brings in international students from the area and helps them integrate into the culture by explaining things such as how is Thanksgiving celebrated here and what it means. How do you properly greet somebody when you meet them at a job interview versus on the street? And I believe programs such as these are a great example of what you can do to increase engagement with these students. A second recommendation is to focus on the largest stakeholder groups, for example, the business administration program or Indian international students. Benefits includes it avoids the generalization of diverse student groups, as discussed before. These are very unique people coming from across the world. They're more diverse than we are as a people itself, as we are one country. There's better engagement with these student groups. We can better pinpoint the problems that they're having and address them. And as a result of that, we can identify trends that will assist us with future migrants in the future intake, allowing us to prevent issues from occurring with future, for instance, with Indian students, if we find an issue, preventing it from starting in the first place. And it is an integrated approach that can include domestic students as well, by virtue of focusing on programs. Cons is that no matter where you try to focus on this, you will ostracize the majority of the group, and this can result in them feeling worse off than otherwise, as you have intentionally selected a group that did not include them. My third recommendation is a utilitarian approach of sorts. We focus on what the town can appropriately engage, not making promises we can't keep. This would be a streamlined approach, focusing on, say, if we have a number of accounting, we have a demand for accountants, we focus on the accounting stream students and pull students from there to find them employment and careers in town. There's no slack in this process because it's a matter of mixing and matching these opportunities with the students that are looking for them. It's easy to measure the success. The problems that come from it, however, are inherent to it, that by finding and perfectly matching these opportunities to the students, once the opportunities are gone, these students will have no reason to stay and will have their biases confirmed, believing that there is no opportunities in town for work. This can be a pro, however, as it will remove the information asymmetry and allow students to better understand whether this town can support their career and ultimate migration. Further, employers are still free to scrutinize, preferring domestic students over international students. There is some phenomenon explaining that some employers will, looking at similar attributes and similar qualifications, prefer domestic students over international students just due to the familiarity. Just based on those, I will now open up to Q&A, just to see if you have any questions and clarify any of the data presented here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adam. So we're going to move into the Q&A component now. I see there's a number of questions in the forum. One of the things I'd like to ask everyone to do, though, beforehand, is to just take a minute to join a quick poll that we've got, just so we know who's out there, who's part of today's webinar. So I'm just going to launch this poll. If you could just take a minute to fill that out, that would be great. Here we go. Just waiting for one more holdout there. Here we go. Awesome.
Lovely.
So, Juliana.
Yeah, so it looks like the results are in. And, we have obviously a tremendous amount of staff support. So thank you very much for all of the staff who are attending today's presentation. I know that lots of students, Adam, you know, I'm going to speak on your behalf, you know, couldn't do what they're doing without the staff support at the and so thanks so much. And we also have a student here today, so that's also wonderful. Thank you so much for attending, everybody. And we're hoping that you'll join us. This is the first of many, we hope, and we hope that you'll keep joining us for these wonderful presentations.
Wonderful. All right, so Adam, let's take a few minutes and get into some questions. We do have a good amount of time, and I know you're eager to answer some of the questions that the public has. So.
Yeah, so Adam, questions coming in fast and furious. So obviously lots of really interesting stuff that you touched on. We've got our first question from Charmaine. Charmaine is asking, are there any unrealistic expectations for finding work in Canada, part-time as a student? Where are they getting that expectation from? That's a wonderful question. So are these international students coming with sort of unrealistic expectations, do you find? And then if so, where are they getting that from?
I guess in the way of unrealistic, it's hard to gauge. I suppose some of the research that I found discussed in particular two student groups, Chinese international students and Indian international students in particular. With regards to Chinese international students, it discussed how some students go abroad to get an international education, this global education, which is more valuable across the board, like they can return home. For Indian international students, it was found that if you want to go into a field, there was a lack of realism, like the unrealism was there. It was domestic back home. I think it's a bit difficult to establish it as unrealistic to expect to work anywhere, because if you can't expect it home and you can't expect it abroad, you can't work on the moon. What I would say is that I think their expectations would be found from just, I guess, a general hope. Like you have to assume that when you're going to, it's what keeps you going, right? You're going to be in school for 4 years. You're going to expect to work at some point after. In terms of unrealistic expectations, as I broadly went over just before about how we can match the work to the student, obviously we don't have work for everybody. There's a limitation of that, eventually, certainly, but not dynamically in Peterborough. I think there is some lack of realism in that you can't assume that you and all of your friends and everyone you've met in school is going to be able to sit in this town and find work. There's far more people here studying than there are skilled jobs. Of course, there are opportunities, though. So I would say it's not unrealistic for each individual to expect an opportunity to find work in Canada as a whole, let alone all of them. In terms of part-time, I guess that depends. If you're talking about part-time related to your career or just part-time work in general, it is difficult, and I discuss it in my paper, that you can't expect to find work related to your career part-time while you're in your studies, because these require more rigorous schedules. You need to be available 9 to 5. You can't do that when you're a student. I would say just the expectation is inherent. It's something even domestic students share. It's not something unique. It's you're going to school for occupational purposes. You're probably under the assumption that you will get the occupation at some point. If you cannot, you go where it can be found. And I think that's the reason we're finding students, at least in perception, are not willing to stay in Peterborough. They don't believe they can find the occupation here. And so they're going to go to wherever they can. If that answers the question.
Wow, that's really quite thorough, Adam. Thanks so much. Charmaine, you're unmuted now. So if you have anything that you wanted to add or expand upon, go right ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, just from your graph where it showed that they were unhappy, and that unhappiness comes from, I would think, having an expectation that as a student, I'm going to get a job, and as a student, I'm also going to get a job, like during the school year I'm talking about. And if that's an unreal expectation, or they're coming in with that expectation, then the reality is less than what they were hoping. or that they thought, then they're going to be unhappy. And I don't want them to be unhappy.
Yeah.
Because I want them not to lose hope, but, maybe they've got the message, well, if you prepare well, if you volunteer, if you do some of these things that can prepare you and give you the skills to really make a good attempt at finding work. I'd rather they come in with that than with the idea that, oh yeah, just go there, you'll get a job as a student, you'll get a part-time job, because we see a lot of students that are facing that situation that come to the Career Centre for career counseling with my colleague Mary, or come to me with their resumes because they don't understand why they're not getting a job. So I don't like to see that disconnect. It's not good for the students' morale.
And that's exactly a wording I use in the paper a lot, the perception, because I don't want to say the lack of jobs in Peterborough is causing this. I believe that a lot of it is perception, because these students, it can't be assumed that they looked for every job in Peterborough. And you can imagine there's some disconnect between coming here from another country and not knowing the systems in place here. Even I don't know all the systems.
Exactly.
I'm still reaching out. What I would say, though, is exactly what I was talking about with my community connections. That I agree. I believe, and I've experienced it. I know a lot of international student friends myself, and a lot of the ones that networked, that met people and went to these group, meetups and talked to all these business owners, they all have careers already. Like most of my friends in the accounting field are either working in a bank or they work at an accounting firm already. And it's because they went to these meetings and they went to these community, get-togethers, and they went to Itch and they went to New Canadian Centre. They met all these people, they shook all these hands, and now they have these opportunities.
Yes.
And so I do believe that a lot of this is that there are opportunities here. There might not be as many as Toronto, certainly.
Yes.
By virtue of size, but they are here. And I do believe that's why a community involvement improves this. It's the information asymmetry. Some of these students know the jobs are here and they go and shake the hands of those people. The students that don't know the jobs are here, why would they try looking if they've already told themselves there's no jobs? So I think a lot of it is exactly that. It's perception.
Adam, your point as well about creating those community touch points. Certainly from a networking perspective, that is key, right, for a lot of students in terms of helping to develop their professional network. So thank you, Charmaine. Wonderful question, and Adam as well for the response.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Charmaine. Okay, so the next one's coming from Karis. This is a great question. Did you identify other migration intents beyond the two you mentioned in your presentation?
It's kind of across the board. There are several in terms of intents to come in the first place and then intents to stay. But I identified were the ones that were the strongest in general. There was a particular trend that I noticed, but it was kind of across the board, and I didn't know how to really talk about it. But it was this response of wanting to experience life abroad. That was one of my questions. And I found it interesting how many students responded to it, because I believe it was approximately like over 50% of students just said they wanted to travel. And that's why they wanted to study abroad. Now, keep in mind, they could select multiple options for this. It wasn't the one reason, but a lot of students indicated they just wanted to travel. And there was another question of Canada specifically. So I asked, are you traveling for the university? Are you traveling for the country? Are you traveling for the town? The town wasn't really something that came up. The university wasn't something that really came up, but Canada was. Over 50% of students indicated they came because they wanted to be in Canada specifically. I think that might be indicative of other things, though. The quality of life, it just comes in, like, some of the attributes overlap with wanting to come to Canada specifically. Overall, there were other intents. For the most part, it was that. Now, we say migration. A trend I did notice based on other research was that some student groups don't necessarily come with the intent to migrate, and that's why they might not have responded. In particular, Chinese international students have a phenomenon that they typically come here for the education to return home. So in that case, as you discuss migration intents, there might be a lack of migration intents with that being intended as well. They don't want to come to stay. They come to get this education to come home. So I'd say the other intents they seem to revolve around Canada as an opportunity.
Amazing. Karis, I've unmuted you. Do you have any more questions in regards to that?
I don't, but I find that really interesting that there's a clear differentiation between students who are coming with migration intent and those who intend to return home afterwards. So Thank you.
I do too. I find that really interesting, especially in combination with the question that was previously asked with with not the disappointment, but the perception of jobs. So if they're just coming because they want a Canadian experience, but then, then they're also answering, well, I also want a job. So yeah, that's a really interesting mix. Okay, next question here from Layla. What types of future research might you suggest? Oh, that's a great question. So Adam, if you could sort of like expand upon what you've done, or what would be your next ticket, what would you do?
It's actually something I discussed with Workforce Development Board. There was a few things we kind of discussed. One of them was a repeat for Fleming. Originally, this project was supposed to be dual approach, like a two-prong, with another student handling the project. But by virtue of it being two people, we did different things. And I think we might get interesting data if we approached Fleming at the same time. Unfortunately, with what's going on, it's a little more difficult. But first, we talked about replicating the study for Fleming. Exact same questions, trying to see what we can compare, and just taking the same approach. We also discussed the same thing being done on a smaller sample, looking at students from ITCH or involved in campus student groups to see if maybe the response is more positive. Perhaps then that would confirm that these touch points are what we need. As you'll see, these students that are involved in the community might feel more positive and optimistic about staying local. Finally, we talked about we lack domestic student data to see if it's comparable. Like, we looked at the 4% of students that want to stay. What percent of students, domestic students right now want to stay? So maybe it's more than domestic students, maybe it's less. So without the numbers to compare to all students, some of this data just kind of sits on its own. But those are the three we were looking at: is repeating this with Fleming, repeating it with smaller groups, and then looking at domestic students to figure out what their intents are.
That sounds incredible. And I really love that, at the onset of this, you wanted to bring Fleming on board too, because their international student body is immense. It's tremendous. And so that would have been a really interesting sort of sample size to get the same, just to sort of present them with the same questions and see how different the answers are from Fleming to Trent. Yeah, that would be amazing.
I would just add, I think a good deal of credit needs to go to the Workforce Development Board, who has been so active in our community to identify various employment trends. And we're obviously grateful to Jennifer LaMancha and the team. Wade Matthews, I know, worked very close with you, Adam, on your research. And we're very thankful that we have community organizations that are really interested in digging deep into some of the issues, as we're starting to see play out now with COVID-19. Adam, your research is very timely.
Layla, how was that for an answer? Did you want to ask Adam any more questions? The floor is yours if you'd like it.
No, I think that was a great answer to the question. And I also agree that I think it would be interesting to see how Fleming students differ from those who go to Trent, and just kind of see whether the college versus university experience is causing people to come to Canada with different intents.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Layla. Great question. And Adam, great answer. Okay, our last question here from Amber. Which is a really good one to finish off the Q&A, if this just happens to be our last one. Were there any limitations to your research?
Yep, quite a few as we went through. One such limitation was the idea of the sample sizes. As I sort of briefly went over, under the Canadian Bureau of International Education, we had, there's a large proportion of students, being 50% being Indian and Chinese migrants. The population, I believe, the sample size in my survey was about 8%, if that, of Chinese students. So it's really hard to draw data from these students and make conclusions when you don't have large enough groups, when you only really have the Indian student population being large enough to draw conclusions on. It made it harder to actually say anything, to say this is how you help this student group when only 6 people responded.
Right.
Another limitation was language. We had some issues with trying to use language in the questions themselves. I did a lot of focus groups to try to run them past international students, see if there was issues in understanding. One question was removed because of exactly this problem. The question was misunderstood, and thus the answers weren't. I couldn't salvage them. They couldn't be used for anything, and so I just kind of had to drop them. And then a final lack of limitation is there's no comparable data. This survey was really large, 38 questions. Survey fatigue was massive. This survey took very long for the average student to complete. there aren't many surveys out there that exceed more than 10 questions on this topic. So there's not, you really have to find pieces to compare even a fraction of the research I did to, making it hard to compare data to other places.
Wonderful.
Right. Amber, how is that? Did you want to, floor's yours, if you have any more questions for Adam, or if you want a little bit more clarification?
I think that covered everything really well. I found that really interesting, and that you looked at your limitations very well, and thank you.
We see we have one last question that's just come in here from Layla. And I'm happy to field that one. It's how do students get involved in community-based research? So a great question. If you're interested in community-based research, we would encourage you to reach out to us. You can email us at tcrc@trentu.ca. You can also visit our website, trentu.ca/tcrc. And we'll have that information for you in a moment. On our website, you'll see a list of all of the projects that were completed this year. So if you want to see a copy of Adam's research presentation, his research poster presentation, if you'd like to read through Adam's final research paper, all of that information is available currently on our website. So it's trentu.ca/tcrc. If you're a student, you can fill out a student application to conduct your research starting in September. And if you're a community organization that has an idea for research, we'd be more than happy to connect with you as well to look at opportunities to work with us.
And I think one thing worth mentioning too is I kind of like jumped on it last minute. If students are actually interested in doing it, they should probably plan for this a little more in advance, because you do have to coordinate with faculty. And by the time you realize these are open, if it's like mid-September, your faculty is like set for the year. They don't want to change up their schedule. You might not have people willing to do it. And so it's better to get on that early in the previous year or even in the summer and say, hey, if I took up a program, would you be willing to supervise me? Because you might not get the people that you'd like to work with when you tell them, early October, hey, want to be my supervisor? And they say, I'm a little busy. And then you're, oh, well, that's your opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point.
Great point.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Layla, for the question, and to everyone that asked questions. It's been a real privilege to spend this time with you today. When I reflect back on the year, community-based research is really a prime example of how students can complement their academic pursuits through experiential learning. And I think through their experiences, graduates like Adam now are more likely to live and to work and make meaningful contributions to their communities. So Adam, again, we're so thankful you could join us, and I would be remiss as well if I didn't acknowledge the ongoing support that we've received from Dr. Jacqueline Muldoon, our provost and the vice president academic here at Trent, for her ongoing support of community-based research. And also over the last academic year, we've had the privilege of working with Tracy Eladrisi, the acting director of Co-op Careers and Experiential Learning, as well as Trent's registrar. And it's just been a real pleasure working with both of those individuals, and to know that there's such strong support for community-based research here at Trent. So in closing, on behalf of Juliana and I and the rest of the team at CareerSpace, we are just so thrilled that you could join us today. And if you have any questions at all, if you have a project idea for September 2020, please do not hesitate to email us, tcrc@trentu.ca. We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.